Alex, could you in like 2 sentences give me the plot of Nosferatu, the Nosferplotsu? That's bad. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
2 sentences. Just what's the movie about for anybody at home who's maybe heard about this thing but has no idea what it is?
Ugly guy really wants the pretty girl, and Willem Dafoe's there.
He is there. And rats. There's rats. If that sounds vaguely familiar, it's because this movie is Dracula. And there's some context required to sort of understand this full picture. And I actually think that the context of Nosferatu and Dracula is relevant to how I feel about this movie. And so we'll circle back to that. But essentially, the original Nosferatu in 1922 is an unauthorized, an unofficial, and unlicensed adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. And that caused issues for it. And that's why it was, for a period of time, sort of a lost film, because the legal action, the lawsuit with Bram Stoker's widow, they destroyed all the original film reels of Nosferatu, all the original copies. And so what we have now is sort of put back together from translations from other parts of the world.
I have zero of that context, so we came at this movie very differently.
Yeah, I knew like everything about it. You knew nothing about it, which is, I think, why we'll have a pretty balanced conversation here. But I do think that context is important because it is Dracula. It's the same story. The characters have different names. There's some different focuses. Have you ever seen Dracula 31?
I've seen Hotel Transylvania.
That's basically the same thing. Yeah, so I'm curious, do you think there are people walking out of this who don't know all that context, who are like, this is kind of Dracula?
Yeah.
Right? Like, do you think general audiences?
I feel like that's just like another level of, I don't want to say stupid, but.
Woof. No, I mean, like can you blame people for not being aware of, like a 20s illegal ripoff of a classic monster story?
I knew none of that, but I could still walk out of a vampire movie being like, Dracula.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, like, the reason why, so for context, I liked it. How did you feel about it? Walking out.
I liked it.
I liked it too. I thought it was
beautiful.
Beautiful film. We'll go into what we liked about it in a second. But I was expecting to love it. I was really, really, like, I had been hyped up to think this was going to be one of my favorite movies of the year. And I think where I was let down is, and I wasn't let down. I had a great time. But the reason it wasn't like a masterpiece to me, like everyone is saying it is that this gothic romance, this tale of the vampire and the beauty has been told so many times, whether it's Dracula or versions of Dracula or other adaptations that were inspired by Dracula or Nosferatu. I feel like this really needed a reason to exist. Like, it needed it needed to justify a modern retelling. And I don't think there was enough new there for me to go like, yes, that had to come out. I had to see that now. Does that make sense?
That's fair.
Could you give me a little bit more about how you felt as knowing nothing coming out of it? What you were expecting versus what you got?
You hyped it up a lot.
I was really looking forward to it.
I really did expect like a masterpiece, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very beautiful, and I thought it was unlike a lot of things that I watch, but I didn't feel much from it. And like, that's really important to me when we watch movies, is how does it make me feel after? And I just felt like I watched a movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think I'm reading a lot of reviews of people feeling that way. But I also feel that a lot of the reviews have been skewed by the marketing. I do think this was marketed more as a horror film than a gothic romance. It's not a horror movie, I don't think. I mean, I'm a little desensitized because I watch a lot of this stuff, but I don't think anything about that was horrific. And the original, I mean, the 22 version, you're talking about a different world. That was scary because people hadn't seen anything like that before. And like, I think it was Sweden. There was a country where that movie was banned until like the 70s for excessive terror.
Nosferatu.
The original Nosferatu. And so like, no, I don't think this is a particularly frightening movie, especially if you watch a lot of horror movies. It's a beautifully shot gothic romance. Before we get into like beat for beat, what we liked, what we didn't like, let's address the Robert Eggers of it all. A phenomenal filmmaker, and like the reason why I was so hyped for this. Have you seen any of his movies? Or
I don't think so.
He's got, I think I wrote down, 2015 was The Witch. 2019 was The Lighthouse, and 2022 he did The Northman.
No, I've seen.
You've never seen it? Okay.
But I really do want to watch The Lighthouse.
I think you'd really like The Lighthouse. I walked out of this still thinking that The Lighthouse is his best movie, and The Witch is right after it. And I think something that was really interesting, they're all period pieces. He likes to do a lot of research, and the detail is like so intricate with the set design, production design is amazing. But the language specifically, like you haven't seen The Witch. If you haven't seen The Witch, whoever you are, they're essentially speaking in a dead language. Like he's dug up this old form of English that's almost impossible to translate, and he somehow tells like a compelling narrative where the actors are speaking in that tongue. Same for The Lighthouse, less so with The Northman, but still a bit. This one I didn't feel was that like linguistically complicated or anything.
I felt like I could follow it.
Yeah, I felt like it all tracked.
The most difficult thing to follow was Bill Skarsgård's accent.
Yeah, it was so cool.
Great.
Every time he spoke, I was just like, And that mustache.
I like a mustache.
Thank you.
Can't say I prefer his.
I like it. I saw Robert Eggers talking about it. I'll put it up on the video format of this, but like that's the original Nosferatu. Bald. He's just like a hairless little elf man. Little. He's massive. But Eggers wanted this guy to look like essentially like an undead Romanian, someone from royalty. And so, yeah, the big bushy mustache and like the fur hat and the coat.
Ridiculous coat. Like,
ridiculous and so
perfect,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I thought that was a really good. Like there were things that I thought he clearly had a voice in. Like I'm not trying to say that it didn't have a reason to exist. It had, and no pun intended, it had less bite than I was expecting it to have.
I don't know how you expect me to follow that up.
Yeah. Okay. So this was made on a reported $50 million budget. It looks better than most $250 million movies. I mean, like every single frame of this movie is gorgeous.
Beautiful. And they used real rats.
It's a lot of practical sets and practical lighting. I forget. I don't want to put a number out there because I don't want to say the wrong number. I do know that they used thousands of real rats on set.
I think it's 2,000.
You think it's 2,000?
I just watched an interview.
Okay.
Where
Yeah.
Robert Eggers says 2,000 and Nicholas Hoult says 7,500.
Okay, cool. So there was like a specific number. That was one of the first things I heard about when I heard this movie was coming out. Is I saw a photo of Willem Dafoe standing in front of the sarcophagus. It's all on fire. It's in the third act of the movie. It's all on fire and he's surrounded by rats. And I think the headline was just like, in Robert Eggers' new movie, Willem Dafoe acts with 2,000 real rats. So that was like the first thing I knew going into this movie. The rats and Willem Dafoe delivered completely.
Aaron Taylor Johnson was...
He was there.
He was there.
He was acting. I thought he was good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I watched Craven 2 weeks ago. But I was like, oh, this is refreshing. Like Aaron Taylor Johnson doing something a little different.
Yeah.
He also had a big fun mustache.
Yeah. I liked him.
Yeah. Emma Corrin's in it.
She's fantastic.
She's great. Obviously, Skarsgård, Lily Rose Depp, Nicholas Hoult, who are like the trio, are phenomenal. Like they all give really physical performances. Mm-hmm. I can imagine if I was Nicholas Hoult or Lily Rose Depp, I would be exhausted every day on set.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the way she
gave it all.
It reminded me of The Exorcist. There were moments where she's on that bed having these hallucinations of Orlok, and he's like invading her mind, and she's doing this physical performance that is like that was probably the most frightening part of the movie.
Yeah,
was
definitely.
Seeing how she could sort of contort herself. Should we talk? I guess we should talk a bit about the cinematography because I think for me that's the star of the show.
I think that's like the biggest selling point.
That's the draw. I think you're going to see this like stunning movie, and I mean like you're so engaged for the first part of the movie. It's a pretty slow burn. Mm-hmm. You're mostly engaged because of how beautiful it looks. I mean, and there's this thing now of people like, oh, I love the cinematography because every frame looks like a painting. Yes, it does. But it's also like very intentional. It's very functional cinematography. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. It sort of keeps the audience where you would want them to be for moments to be effective. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. I'm thinking specifically of like, the moment Nicholas Hoult discovers Orlok in his coffin in his sarcophagus. There was the sequence of Nicholas Holt's character Thomas, just a brief little plot thing if you haven't seen it. Like in Dracula, he is traveling to Transylvania to sell, basically to get Orlok's signature on this real estate deal. But Orlok has grander plans. He wants someone to come physically so that he can return. And he becomes, in Dracula, he becomes his familiar, right? Renfield, the Renfield character. But in this, you actually get to watch him travel to the castle and see Orlok's influence through his perspective. So everything's very twisted, and you're not sure what's real or not.
It's like this weird haze. It seems
Yeah.
like he might be on drugs or hallucinating, and you feel like as he gets closer to the castle, like Orlok's influence on his mind.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah, by the time he reaches the castle, basically you can't really trust anything that he's seeing, which was really effective. I know you haven't seen the original Nosferatu. I thought that sequence of him arriving at the castle was much more effective because in the original, and to some extent in Dracula and in a lot of Dracula adaptations, when Renfield, or the Renfield character, in this case it's Thomas, when he arrives at the castle, he's a little too comfortable. I don't know, he's always played it too calm for me when there's this beast in front of him, especially in Nosferatu, because in Dracula he's very slick and you could make the argument that you think he's a human. In this, like, there's no argument that that's not a living man. He looks like a zombie.
I don't know. I think it like at first they do enough to keep his face out of the light for you to feel like, are we certain that this is a vampire? Or
he is also teleporting around the room. But like
Edward Cullen level speed, but
there was a little bit of sparkle at the end, which I want to talk about. And I don't know if that was a direct reference, but there is a sparkle at the end.
Miss sparkle?
I think there was.
Was
sparkle.
it when the sunlight came in?
Yes. But no, I mean specifically like Nicholas Holt's performance when he's terrified.
Oh yeah.
He's shitting himself, and I think he does a really good job in that moment where a lot of Renfield Thomas actors don't do that. Funny that Nicholas Holt played the Renfield character in Renfield and is kind of playing the Renfield character in this.
These are the same movies.
Renfield in this, yeah, basically the same film. Yeah, but it's just like really beautiful and again functional and like really well thought out cinematography when he's walking down that long path towards the castle and the carriage just sort of arrives in front of him and the door opens and he doesn't even question it, and then he's going up the path and suddenly he's just there.
Yeah.
It all really worked for me in that way. I just kept waiting for the movie to be like, and here's where we make our mark on this story, and I didn't feel like it ever really did. But that's nitpicky because, again, it's like a masterful film. It's just like story-wise, we've done this, so why are we doing it again? Maybe to give Ellen, the main character, a little bit more of a focus at the end. She becomes essentially the heroine of the story, even though it ends the same way that Nosferatu ends.
I think that I would have enjoyed it more had it fully been from her perspective.
Yeah, I
think that would have been a much more interesting thing to do.
Definitely.
Is to see, like, kind of, like, we understand why she summons him in the beginning.
Right.
But I want to see the follow through. They only ever reference her fits and leading up to
her past. Oh, she's always been like this.
She's been affected by having Nosferatu in her life. And the whole middle of the movie is watching everyone observe her and her, what does she call it?
What does she call it?
Her, like, fits in the middle of the night.
I don't know.
Anyways.
It's like, yeah, they're all taking turns trying to guess what's wrong with her. She's having nightmares. She's having delusions. She's in grief. And then essentially Willem Dafoe's character is brought in as like this, no, this is something mystical. And they discover together that it's the influence of a demon or a vampire. What is it called? A vampire.
Is that what he says?
Yeah, because they do the like actual vampire pronunciation.
Nova's.
Oh yeah, Nova's been here the whole time. By the way, Nova, come here. Say hi. Say hello.
No, I'm good.
Don't eat my microphone. Anything else like positive? It just feels like we're nitpicking, and I think it's because again, like all the conversation around this movie has been so positive. I just want to give it a little bit of like why it didn't quite reach that level for me while still loving it. The shadow work, I mean, phenomenal. Like,
I also liked the way that, like, they switched into black and white fairly often, but it was never like jarring. It always felt when there was an absence of light, it was black and white, which was really cool to see.
Yeah, there was like this saturation desaturation thing that would kind of happen and you wouldn't even notice it, and then you go, oh my gosh, like Orlok's influence is felt and there's no color in this scene, or during the daytime when Orlok is not present at all, suddenly there's just this presence of color that ties really well into the themes of like this movie kind of states it, but essentially that women are often responsible for taking on these evil men or sacrificing themselves or their purity to evil men to keep the world, not to keep the world safe, to keep the world running.
Yeah, but
essentially, what do you think?
Sacrifice themselves.
She isn't allowed to love, essentially, because she has to love this thing.
She also is punished for essentially only ever wanting affection that she never had as a child.
You're like talking.
I'm trying to talk, but she's trying to eat it, so it's a little difficult.
Yeah, about like
She's
Ellen's
punished.
responsibility.
She
She is
only ever
punished.
wanted love and affection, and she couldn't help who she was. And in asking for that, she's cursed with this demon, and she's the only one who can save everyone. She has to die.
Right.
And all she wanted was to be loved.
Yeah, and there was this great framing too of like, which isn't in the original, of Nicholas Hoult thinking that he's gonna do this, like that he's gonna be the hero, and they have this moment in the carriage where they're like, "And you're gonna go do this, and you have to stay home, my love, because I have to save
like,
you."
Just stay there until he's dead.
Yeah, she's like, "Don't come home until he's dead," full knowing, and also Willem Dafoe knowing that she's the one that has to fight this battle. It has nothing to do with Thomas. I thought that was great. I thought the ending was great. So to circle back to what I was hinting at earlier, if you know Edward Cullen famously sparkles in the sunlight.
Best vampire story ever.
True. Well, no. The original, similarly, I haven't seen it in a while, but I think it ends with Orlok's kind of standing over Ellen. Similarly, the light comes in and he disappears into smoke. Basically, instead of stabbing him through the heart or any of the traditional vampire cliches, she just has to keep his attention until morning because he's this insatiable thirst. And if she can just give him what he wants long enough, he'll die in the sunlight. And that's what happens. And when he is suffering, loved the way they did the vampire dying in the sunlight. He starts bleeding through the eyes. And it's really, really striking. He sparkles a little bit. There's like a glisten on his back, and I'm like, that is either a direct Twilight reference, or I need to go back and reread Bram Stoker's Dracula and see if there's something I'm missing.
I'm fully sold that it's Twilight.
Why not? Yeah, and it's so funny because Pattinson is a Robert Eggers collaborator. They did The Lighthouse together, and I wonder if that was like a little nod to his friend, or I'm just making it up and there was sweat on his back and it was sparkly.
Do you know what I learned? I
don't know what you learned.
The movie last night, all I've seen online is Nosferatu interviews with the cast and with Robert Eggers. He actually said that when they were filming that final scene, the beast, it's bleeding still toward in that last shot, and it's bleeding from its eyes and everywhere, and they rigged it to bleed from the anus. And he, I guess, decided like that kind of takes away from the emotional feeling
from like
of
the
this
beauty
cut.
of the moment.
So they plugged it.
They plugged the butt?
He said they plugged it.
That's the best. I'm going to use that to promote this episode. What do you? That's the best story I've heard all week. That's such a Robert Eggers thing, and I think like to tie it all with a bow. Like that's what I think was missing a little bit from the movie. Is like there were these moments of like Robert Eggers. I mean, watch The Lighthouse. It's goofy at times, but like
was also
intentionally. There were moments where you were like, oh, we're kind of hinting at that Eggers. I don't know, quirkiness. Yeah. And then it doesn't quite. And like that's something that would have been not in the movie that we saw, but in a different version of the movie, I would have laughed my ass off.
Hilarious.
I would have bled my ass out.
I think it would have added to this feeling of like what you were just saying about Ellen and her just having to keep his attention for long enough.
Yeah.
It's just like, he's just a man who's like...
He is. I mean, he represents
is
the...
distracted by like this woman's beauty and can outsmart him, and then
the blood...
How hilarious would it be that he's just bleeding from like every
orifice. Yeah, and there is a bit of that. Like Orlok is not some... And that is where I think Orlok and Dracula differ so drastically. Is Dracula is the suave... seductor, and Nosferatu, like Orlok isn't that. He even says in the third act, like he is just desire. He's just passion. He represents.
He's an appetite or something.
Yeah, I'm just an like whatever. Like I can't fulfill an appetite. I am an appetite, and yeah. So it was interesting that last scene of the movie that like there was no big hero moment. There's even a shot of him like sucking her blood and she barely has any energy and he pulls away and she goes, no more, just to keep him going until the sun comes up. And I thought, maybe that is what Eggers was was his modern angle, right? Was the Ellen point of view more at the end. I just wanted more of it.
Yeah, I would have preferred entirely her point of view.
Yeah, I would have maybe pulled out a lot of the Thomas stuff.
Yeah. And also, I mean, as much as I enjoyed Aaron Taylor Johnson, I feel like we spent a little too much time in that house.
With his family,
with
yeah.
him deciding, is she sick or is this something more?
Yeah, and you have to wonder if that stuff's there too just because the movie needs more
substance.
Yeah, there needs to be more going on, because if not, it's just this creature talking to her in her dreams from a distance. Speaking of talking to her in her dreams, before we stop reviewing in this portion of the show, I just want to say the shadow shots. The shadow work in this movie is incredible. You'll see it in all the marketing. His hand across her face or over the city. Thank you for the little kisses. I love you too. It's phenomenal. It's so in the spirit of the original. It's really effective. There were moments where you're like, that's visually interesting, but then there were also, again, really functional things, like when Orlok's shadow comes under the door and unlocks it so that he can enter, or it's essentially the opening scene of the movie when Ellen calls out to him. The billowing linens, right? You can see that there's nobody standing on the balcony, but every time the linens cross in front, his silhouette is standing there. You remember, you saw it, and it's stuff like that where you go, okay, this was made with such craft, because I've watched him talking about it. A lot of that was practical. It was done in camera. They had to figure out, how do you make a shadow bend a certain way? And yeah, that's very much in the spirit of the original, because he was saying, you could easily do it all with CG, but they figured it out in 22. So if they did it practically in 22, we've got to find a way to do it practically now.
The hand over the city, though, was CG.
The hand over the city was CG. I mean, what they did is they took LiDAR scans of actual buildings in Germany, wherever it took place, and they built a CG cityscape, and then they filmed his hand and then superimposed it. I don't know how you would do that practically. Maybe with a miniature.
Maybe.
Build a model. That would be the way to do it. Yeah. We figured it out.
Yeah. I loved how goofy it was, though. The scene where the doctor is with, I can't remember his name, the character, the one who goes crazy. He's
the boss.
He's Orlok's servant.
Yeah,
who's done his bidding.
He was Thomas's boss.
Yeah, he's eating the bird head.
Yeah, when he bites the head off the bird. I think that was in the trailer too.
The doctor just goes, "Why would you do that?
Why would you do that?" Yeah, and it's really interesting with the time period and the setting of the plague. You can understand how people in these periods of time would have written stories about this darkness, right? That enters their town and needs to be flushed out by essentially the sacrifice of a pure woman. It's like watching history from a shadowy corner,
Yeah. And I think it is interesting because all of these mythical tales of vampires and beasts, werewolves, they all are rooted in these older civilizations not understanding something that's happening and saying, well, it must be
it must be wickedness, it must be evil. And also it's a lot of early civilization processing the evils of man, right? The two-sided nature of man, Jekyll and Hyde, the wolf man, Dracula. It's the sexual nature that will drive someone to evil, and it's almost always stopped by purity or femininity. And it's just interesting every time these movies come up. I know some audiences were expecting a jump scare horror fest, and they're a little disappointed in that. That's not the point of something like this. And so if we're going to bring the monsters back, which I hope we are, I want them to bring it back for the story and for the core messaging, not for jump scares and guts and all that stuff.
I feel like it's also a very good introduction to this,
Gothic romance.
Gothic horror romance. I know nothing about it, but I do want to watch more. I want to watch the original Dracula and Nosferatu, and I want to understand the imagery because I don't understand a lot of it. And I think it's very smart to use Lily Rose Depp and
A-list actors
as these are people we know day to day.
Yeah.
Put them in a very extreme film
that's
to introduce it to the mainstream.
I think that's smart casting now. I mean, we talked about it a little bit last night, but Christopher Nolan is doing the Odyssey right now. He's doing Homer's Odyssey. And it's Tom Holland and Zendaya and Pattinson and Matt Damon. Those are names that are going to get people to go see a film that they probably otherwise wouldn't have seen. Oppenheimer was a similar thing. That's a historical drama, and people rushed to go see it because of the names that he cast. I feel the same way with Nosferatu. It gives you a reason to get modern audiences engaged. And I'm glad that you're interested in Gothic because it's a genre that I love. And you liked Saltburn a couple years ago,
Love
and that was
Saltburn.
very
That
Gothic.
was last year. Isn't that crazy?
Wasn't that 2 years ago?
Was it? Are
I
we
think it was
sure?
2 years ago.
I don't know. I have zero reference.
Either way, like that's very Gothic inspired, and there's a lot of monster stuff on the horizon, and I hope there's an interest for it with stuff like this overperforming because this is doing super well.
I think that's the way to go. We talk about, Marvel and DC and like kind of the big budget franchise films carrying theaters.
Tentpole films,
But
yeah.
that's why you put popular actors in these art pieces to attract more people. Like I was surprised that a week out from seeing it last night, the
Full theater
was still full. We couldn't find a showtime.
It's been
that
very
wasn't full.
reassuring, like Wicked and this and a few other movies that we've seen seem to have legs. We're going weeks later to do rewatches, and there are still people there. Clearly their first time because they're laughing, they're reacting.
And clearly our 7th time on Wicked.
7th time, they're trying not to sing along. But it is one of those things where you're like, maybe if we didn't have the streaming window so narrow, movies would find audiences over time. Oh, did you see Nosferatu? It's really good. You should go see it. Okay. And then you go see it instead of waiting a week for it to be on streaming, which gets me to a ranking, which is the point of all this. It's subjective, baby. Everybody likes different stuff. So the easiest way I find to do this is, would you recommend that people skip it, wait to stream it, or go see it in a theater?
I think this is something that should be seen in the theater.
I agree.
I don't think I would have enjoyed this just watching it at home. No. And not that it couldn't be enjoyed, but I don't think you get the full effect.
No, and I think you want your first time watching something to be the intended experience, and the intended experience for this is a big screen, great audio. You want to hear, there was a couple moments where I could kind of feel his voice on the back of my neck, and that's what you're going for. So I would say the same thing. I would say go to a theater. But I would say temper your expectations. You're not going to see a Scream movie or a slasher or whatever. You're going to see a Gothic romance. It's a creepy love triangle. It's a messy tale. But don't expect jump scares and that sort of thing.
It's definitely entertaining. I do think it's a little bit too long.
You thought? It's like 2 hours and 12, something like that.
I don't know. I think it could have been shorter.
Yeah, I think it could have been a hair shorter. But again, I think a lot of that's what we're talking about is like part of the story, a good chunk of the first part of the story is like, we're over here and I think I'd rather be somewhere else. I think I'd rather be following Ellen. Let's talk next episodes because we got a couple good movies coming up. We're doing this on release Fridays. So obviously movies will screen on Thursdays, new movies. If we're interested, we're going to talk about them and have new episodes out on Fridays. I've got our next episode on January 17th, which is The Wolfman. Or I believe it's just called Wolfman.
Another movie I know nothing about.
And another classic monster remake. I love it. This is what I'm talking about. People are interested. It's Lee.
We watched the trailer for it.
We watched it. It played in front of Nosferatu. It looks good.
Looks good.
It's directed by Lee Winnell, who's very talented, and I think they could tell a really grounded, cool story.
Sure.
But we'll see, and you'll see. And we'll talk about it in a couple weeks. And then just because this is the first episode and I want you to have a couple things to look forward to, February 14th, Valentine's Day, the most romantic film we're talking about, Captain America Brave New World.
And that is where we will be for our first
That's where we'll be for our first married Valentine's Day is at a screening of Captain America Brave New World. Red Hulk, I'm sure they're going to do some like Valentine's.
That would be really
smart.
That
would be smart of them to lean into that. But anyway, we're not in marketing. Is that all? Is that it? Thanks for chatting with me. This is Watch Buddies, by the way. New podcast. Obviously, you can see us. You can hear us. I just think 90% of the time it's not what you watch. It's who you watch it with. You've taught me that. I love watching things with you.
I love going to the movies together.
So yeah, we're going to watch movies and we're going to talk about them. You're my ultimate watch buddy. I've got some other watch buddies who are going to be joining us to talk about things as well. So yeah, just follow along. You can follow THR on Instagram. On Threads. I'm on Blue Sky. I don't use it, but as long as it's not Twitter, I don't care.
I have no socials to plug, so just follow him.